is that when Jesus was on the cross, who was he praying to? If he and the Father are one, when he was calling out, why, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Many believe that you guys can't answer this. What's your response to that? How do you explain that?
Yes. Once again, this is the true humanity of Christ. If we imagine ourselves at the point of death or in some other situation, we can feel forsaken by God. If we can feel that forsakenness, Jesus had to have that same capacity as a human to feel that. This is actually a quotation from Psalms.
Yes.
David felt forsaken. Now, I would argue...
But that's not the point. The point is that the Father clearly was a distinct person from him.
Well,
because he felt forsaken by the Father.
But
so
the point
I would
make,
the Trinitarians
yes, but the point I would make there is David was not actually forsaken by God. He only experienced the feeling, a
but
genuine
whether or not
feeling.
David is a separate, distinct person
Yes.
from the person from whom he felt the alienation.
Yeah.
So that's the point.
But okay, let's take a look more closely. What I think is happening is Jesus was taking the place of sinners and actually suffering the punishment of the sins of the world at that time. So he had to take, in essence, the punishment of a sinner in the lake of fire to feel forsaken. But actually, that is dealing with his human identity.
His human identity.
In the same sense, he said, I thirst. Well, God cannot get thirsty.
Yes.
But what I would say is the Spirit of God was in him, but the Spirit of God did not shield him from that human experience of thirst. Likewise, the Spirit of God within him did not shield him from that human experience of forsakenness or punishment for sin. And really, the Trinitarians would have a similar issue. Did Jesus, was he separated from the second person of the Trinity? The spirit of that second person? Well, you would say no. So it's really the same kind of argument because we're both talking about the true human experience of Jesus Christ.
And that explanation would also cover the other instances in which he's praying to the Father.
Yes.
He's making references to the Father.
Yes.
Many references in the New Testament, in the Gospel accounts, where there's a distinction.
And I would argue
and the account where of the baptism,
Yes.
where the Father says, "This is my beloved Son."
Yes.
And this Trinitarians, a number of ordinary Trinitarians, this is such a strong point. Here is a Father now saying, "This is my beloved Son." How can you say the Father and the Son are the same when the Father is speaking and the Son is down here?
Yes. Actually, we're not saying the Father equals the Son. We're saying the Father is in the Son. Because Son refers to God as He's manifested in the flesh. The Son was born. The Son died. Well, even Trinitarians have a problem here because they don't believe the second person of the Trinity was born or died.
Precisely.
We are dealing with human flesh.
Yes.
So I would say the prayers of Christ are a greater problem for Trinitarians if they try to use that to prove the Trinity. Because if their second person is inferior, seeking help, seeking guidance, it proves too much.
It proves too much.
It proves he's not co-equal. But rather, this is dealing with the incarnation, showing that Jesus, as an authentic human being, related to God just as we relate to God.
You are saying something very significant, Dr. Bernard. That the Trinitarian exegesis itself is quite treacherous.
Yes.
Because if they are very careful, a lot of it proves too much.
Yes.
And explode. In other words, it contains the seeds of its own destruction.
That's right. Exactly. Which lets you know they're on the wrong track, in my view. And they need to rethink.
Because there will be a problem with internal consistency.
Yes.
In Trinitarian theology, you would say.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. In your view, what would be among some of the most deadly arguments against the Trinitarian position?
Well,
if you were to summarize.
First of all, understanding the doctrine, who is God? In the Old Testament, God is revealed as Jehovah, the Father, and so on. Colossians 2:9 says, in Jesus dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. So the question is Jesus in the Godhead? Trinitarians would argue that Jesus is one of three persons in the Godhead. But actually, this scripture turns it around and says the Godhead is in Jesus.
Fully, bodily, yes.
John 14:9, which I alluded to, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Okay, that's an instrument.
So you cannot see the Father separate and apart from Jesus. Okay. Revelation 22, 3 through 4, in eternity, we will see one God on the throne. It says there's one throne. It's the throne of God and of the Lamb, and His servants shall serve Him. The Lamb is Christ in His sacrificial role. And so if you take a look at
In
it,
the sacrificial role.
yes, the Lamb died. Now, when we go to heaven, we don't expect to see an animal.
I know, but that's a representation.
But it's a
of
representation
that.
of Christ in His humanity, the one who died for us. But Revelation 22:3, there shall be no more curse, but the throne, singular, of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and His servants shall serve Him, and they shall see His face, and His name shall be in their foreheads. So in eternity to come, we're going to see one divine throne in heaven, one on that throne with one face, one identity. He will be called simultaneously God and the Lamb. That's obviously Jesus Christ. He's the only one who's both deity and the sacrifice for sin. That leaves no room for a distinct or different personality of Father and Spirit. And so that's another point that I would make. And I think I would go to the Trinitarians and say, all right, if you are trying to demonstrate three persons, you will have to define, what do you mean by persons?
Yeah, but they admit, and no more the more sophisticated ones will say that persons, the word person does not accurately capture God. And many they would say the hypostasis. So they admit that that is problematic. So we wouldn't use that against them. How would you deal with the Colossians text, which talks about God creating the world through Jesus?
Yes.
Christ, which seems to suggest that Jesus existed distinctly before the incarnation.
Well,
that God created the world through him.
Yes, by the Son or through the Son.
That's right.
I would say independence upon the Son. I do not think there are two persons side by side at creation, because Isaiah 44:24,
go back to that I alone,
alone and by myself. That is consistent. But here's the beautiful truth.
So manage the Colossians.
There is a profound truth in Colossians, and that is, when God created humans, He knew that humans would sin, and they would not fulfill His purpose in creation. So you might imagine, why would God go through the exercise of creating humans to have fellowship with Him when He knew it would all be destroyed? Because the Lamb was slain from the foundation of the world.
As it were.
In Revelation 13:8 and so forth. That is, God looked forward to the incarnation, to the Son of God being born and died. And so all of creation is predicated upon the Son of God. It's actually a beautiful depiction that the incarnation and the atonement is at the center of human history. Creation was,
so you say this was
with
kind
the
of
Son in view. Exactly.
When it says that God created the world through Christ.
Through the Son. Not only in anticipation, but in reliance upon the atonement. Creation itself was predicated.
To say that He created the world through Jesus.
Well, yes. But Jesus
that means
did
that
not
Jesus would have had to exist.
Not as a human being.
But doesn't this...
It's the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Sounds like the Lamb was there pre-existent, but no, not at all. Right?
But doesn't that text affect your theology in a great way, it seems? That Colossians text there, it seems disruptive.
Well, I think it's very powerful, because it is saying all of human history is centered on Jesus Christ. He is the fullness of the Godhead revealed. He wasn't a son So he was a kind of a logos, a thought in God's mind. Well, I would say more than a thought. I would say the mind of God, the plan of God. Very rich
actually
and full.
existing as a person. We're looking at the matter of the Godhead.